cosa a la docente y la profesora le va a permitir a los estudiantes hablar. Bueno,
¿Me haces un
solamente la
favor?
profesora.
Me das privilegios para hacer breakout rooms?
Sí, ya estás en el momento, ya estás.
No, no tengo.
Sí, Silvia
No.
Otero,
Sí,
profe.
pero no
Sí,
tengo privilegios para hacer breakout rooms. No me sale la opción.
sí, cuando yo salga te va a quedar esa
Ah, bueno.
opción, porque en este momento yo soy anfitrión y tú eres coanfitriona. En el
Listo.
momento que yo salga, ya tú quedas como anfitriona de la sala.
Ok,
Bueno,
perfecto. Gracias.
bueno, con mucho gusto, un feliz día.
Bueno. Ivana, you raised your hand. Ivana? So this incredible journalist of the New York Times that did the investigation of the AIC files that you read, and as I was preparing class, I said, I'm going to write her and say that, you know, this investigation and reporting is extraordinary and that it really helps understand the logic of rebel governance. And so I wrote her on Twitter, and then she responded. And I said, okay, now that she responded, I'm going to ask her to record an audio for my students for my class. And she was so generous and nice that she actually did. So I wanted to give you that surprise for today. And I think that what she's saying, that audio is very important to understand both logics, recruitment, or both processes, recruitment and rebel governance. Okay, I'm going to continue sharing my presentation now that I can. So so now let's talk about rebel governance. So rebel governance taps into a classic problem of politics and the state and order. Rebel governance is about creating a political order, right? To creating a rule. And how to create political order is something that has been discussed by political theories back in the day of, you know, the classics. Machiavelli, for instance, in The Prince, which is a book I am sure you have read, says the following: it must be considered that there is nothing more difficult to carry out, nor more doubtful of success, nor more dangerous to handle than to initiate a new order of things. And this is actually what rebels are doing in the places where they have territorial control, or where they want to have territorial control. They want to create a new order of things, and this is not easy to do. This requires a lot of technologies of order and obedience. So there is this other quote that says the following: here a question arises whether it is better to be loved than feared, or the reverse. The answer is, of course, that it would be best to be both loved and feared. But since the two rarely came together, anyone compelled to choose will find greater security in being feared than in being loved. And this talks about the importance of coercion in the creation of these orders, right? The importance of rules that in cases in which they are violated, there will be punishment. And the punishment is linked to the creation of fear, and how instigating fear in a society, in a community. It's a tool that the rulers use to start this new order of things. And that really helps us understand the logic of rebel governance in the case of rebel groups, which are violent actors. So let's talk about the definition of rebel governance. Right here, we have a picture. Someone wants to discuss what are you observing in this picture right here? Who wants to raise hand? Raise hand. No, yeah, Luisa, go ahead. What is happening in this picture? You can unmute yourself. You can't. We don't listen to you. Luisa, I'm going to unmute you manually.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I couldn't unmute myself. I was writing, type in the group. So what I can see in that image, can you please put that again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I just realized that I need to unmute you manually. Okay.
Thank you. So I'm just seeing a couple of guys. I think they're the rebel ones, and they're standing in some cigarettes, some boxes of cigarettes. And I think that's kind of interesting because in the same Caliphate audio, we can just listen to the person who was talking about how they punished smoking and alcohol and that type of things that for the Muslim are not that right. So I'm guessing that that is so connected with the things that we are seeing in this moment, that they try to control people's lives because they are supposed to do some things that are good for their religion, their culture.
Exactly. So, right. So this image that we are having here, it's probably the destruction of cigarettes in a place that is controlled by ISIS. And it is not destroying cigarettes for destroying cigarettes. It's about imposing rules of social behavior among the community that the community has to obey. So this creates a link of obedience with the rebel group. Which also serves the political purpose of the rebel group, which is to impose this version of Islam that is morally superior. So when we define rebel governance as the following. We talk about a series of institutions. And if you have taken classes on political concepts, you know that institutions, when we talk about institutions in political science, we not only talk about things like, you know, the courts or the presidency or a building. No, we talk about norms and rules of behavior. So rebel governance refers to institutions that are established by insurgent organizations to manage the relationships with civilians living in the territory under its control. And those institutions take the form of a system of taxation, most generally, and also a series of rules that can be formal or informal for governing civilian life. So taxation is an important part because rebels govern territories in order to tax and get resources for their own groups, and that is something that is so well explained in the article of ISIS, and also for governing civilian lives. And then in the next part of the definition, which is by Ana Arjona, the person that we read for today, armed groups governance entails the establishment of rules or institutions to regulate civilian populations, the relation between combatants and civilians, or both. So here we are talking about the different aspects or dimensions that rebel governance entail, and not only are relationships between civilians, but also between civilian and the combatants. So rebel governance referred to that set of institutions and rules. Okay, and okay, here we have three pictures. We have a picture, this picture right here, it says Manual de Convivencia para el Buen Funcionamiento de las Comunidades. It's a set of rules that we can find in rural areas of Putumayo and Caquetá in the periods in which the FARC rebel group controlled those areas. And we have a picture of, a house, probably a rural house, which is marked up with FARC EP Frente 36. So it refers to the presence that rebel group and that particular front did in this area. So what we are going to do is that now with the handout that you have, we are going to do breakout rooms, and in the handout, what the handout includes are like parts of that manual de convivencia, right? Some of those rules. I didn't include all of them because it's super long, but I included like some that for me were like very interesting and important to study. So you're going to use that handout, and we are going to discuss these 3 questions. First, and you can take a picture of this if you like, and I think it would be a good idea for you to take a picture of this. What are the aspects of life that FARC and ISIS regulate? So ISIS you already read. FARC, you have that manual de convivencia. So think about, when I talk about aspects, I'm referring to things, like social, movement, economy, education, I don't know. There are many things. So think about what are the aspects that these groups are regulating. And then I want you to think if there are similarities between FARC rule and ISIS rule, and what would be the main differences. And lastly, would you live in Mosul, which is like the city in which the reporting of the New York Times takes place? Or would you live in Cartagena del Chaira, which is, a place that is under the rules of this Manual de Convivencia? So I'm going to do breakout rooms of about 4 people, 3 to 4 people. Sorry. And you have 15 minutes until 9:50 to have this discussion with your group, to read the Manual de Convivencia and to have this discussion, okay? So if you have questions, you can write me on the chat, and I will pay attention to it while you are in the breakout rooms. You have to join the group. You have now to join the breakout room. I have sent you an invitation to join, so say yes, join. Okay, you're all here. Good. How did it go with the breakout rooms? Is something that you liked, that you had tried before? No hands raised. Okay, let's start with the discussion then. So the first question was the following. What are the aspects of life that FARC and ISIS regulate? Who wants to share what your group did during the time of the breakout room? You can raise your hand in order to unmute you. Dario, I listen to you.
Okay, we discussed about certain differences that are very remarkable, and we discussed that one of the biggest differences is that the exhaustive control over the ideology, and even in the education, in the case of ISIS, that is not present in the case of FARC.
Okay.
And maybe the ISIS, the other bigger difference is the for ISIS give give to the population public services,
Yeah.
and maybe the radicalism is the fact that maybe is the biggest difference between those. And mm, the radicalism maybe could be expressed in the fact that uh, even the death is present in the case of ISIS, in the cases that um, you're not act, you're not fulfilling the rules, or I don't know, and
Yeah, you're not
that's
complying
it.
in the case in which you
Okay,
don't comply
that
and you get
okay, okay.
punished. Okay, thank you very much, Dario. So yeah, we had you mentioned a couple of differences between the rules manual of FARC and the rules manual of ISIS. Other group wants to share their thoughts about these questions. Hands raised. Okay, Ivana.
I do you listen? Yes. Okay. So one of the things that we want to highlight was a difference that we like. I don't know that we came with it is that when we talk about ISIS, we are talking about a group that is religious based,
Right.
and when we talk about FARC, we talk about a group that is, I mean, but we can say that is about ideology.
Right. Yeah.
So that is like a main difference that we see. But in order to that difference, we also know that it doesn't matter if it's religion or ideology, because they both of them want to like control all social aspects, like by ruling with that ideology or religion, but they want and they use it in order to control all these aspects.
Yeah, that's a great point. So we would think that a religious inclined group would, of course, want to regulate things as consumption of alcohol or prostitution or drugs consumption. And yet FARC do that as well. FARC, they don't ban, they don't prohibit people from consuming alcohol, but they really limit it. They control it. And they don't allow people to consume drugs, to use drugs. And they also control prostitution. They put a cap on the amount of prostitutes that there can be in a place, and they regulate them. They make sure that these women are healthy, and it is important to have this comparison with FARC, because controlling social aspects gives them legitimacy, gives them power, gives them makes people to like them. And okay, that was great. Thank you, Ivana. Who wants to talk about the third question? Would you live in Mosul or in Cartagena el Chaira? Who wants to share thoughts about that? Maria, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. So with my group, we were discussing if we had other choices, of course we would go away. But if we take a look into the reality, it is not the option for many people, especially for us as women. So it's been said, and it is obvious that for us women, the repertoires of violence within the war are different than from men. So if we were the three of us were girls in the group, so we were discussing how hard it would be to actually move out, and risk being away. And in the case we had a family, how would we move with our families, and how would we manage to escape from a territory and go to another territory, and comply with all the uncertain things that we can put ourselves into, so we were talking about that. And as women, it is really hard in the context of the conflict. It is different, it hits different the woman that hits the man. So the three of us came to the conclusion that of course we would try to do something, but if we think in the reality and in the logic of the people who's actually facing those kind of things, we would just try to comply with it and try to adapt to the things that we have, because it is the most certain thing to go with the thing or through the thing.
That is a great point, Maria. Thanks for sharing. And actually, so these rules, they have differentiated impacts on different types of people. So something like the ISIS manual is very hard on women, and it's incredibly hard on people from different faiths. And for those people that are very threatened by these rules, then it would really make sense to leave rather than staying, right? But if you are a male and your faith is sunny faith, then maybe you have things to win in this type of order. Maybe it's not that bad. I don't know. What do you guys think? Valentina, can you please discuss what you wanted to share? Yes, we'll listen to you, Valentina. I already unmuted you.
Okay, now. Yes, I really liked the discussion that we had, because suddenly it was about how this kind of political order and warfare in general tend to masculinize these kind of societies. And also, even though FARC has female combatants, they have to accept this kind of behavior code, this kind of patriarchal behavior codes, and also cook for the troops. So they still have they're very gender oriented social behaviors also in this kind of context. But for example, one thing that occurred me was that in Italy, I teach voluntarily Italian to Muslim women that migrate, and we have mainly from Bangladesh and Afghanistan. So of course conflict situations, and they go through these very long trips, 1 or 2 years, where they have to spend a lot of money. And also they start taking hormones or curing themselves to sterilize themselves after they leave, because they know that it is very likely that they will be violated, so they get prepared for that. And I mean, according to the third question, would you live in these cities? I mean, I wouldn't live in these cities, but do I have a choice? Or does the frustration to know that I will be violated incentives me to leave, or take the risk of submitting myself to Sharia, or I don't know, other behavior coding? So I think it is very interesting, because and this is related to one of the readings that you assigned in the other class. I mean, the fact that women get to be scapegoats, I don't know what the word is.
Scapegoats. Mm-hmm.
Among parties, because they're perceived as a prize, or also an instrument to fight against the other part, and and they're like also an instrument to, I don't know, vent frustrations of combatants. So it is very interesting to think about conflict in this kind of gender
Right,
perspective.
and I think it is really interesting that you are bringing the gender aspects, and I think that it can move both ways, because yeah, in AICs, like for logical reasons, the role that they are assigned to women in society are like they are excluded from public life. They have to abide to the domestic realm. They cannot do they cannot work, they cannot be on the outside without wearing particular garments. They are their movements are completely restricted. So for women in those places, the choice is hard, and because living entails, as you mentioned, incredible risks to their lives, to their well-being. So sometimes they might think, okay, maybe if I just comply with the rules and I stay home, and this cannot last forever, so I'm just going to leave to be at home for like 3 years or something, or 4 years, and maybe I can survive. The rules are clear. I think I can get through this. So many women do that type of calculations. Then in Colombia, what we observe in places that the paramilitaries and the guerrillas controlled is that one of the social behaviors that they regulated was violence, domestic violence. So for many women, the rule of the armed actor was a protection against being hidden by their partners, against being left without food or money, because the rebels were really, they punished strongly those types of behavior. So that could come across as a protection for women, and they in many places accepted the rule of the FARC, and like gladly, right? That they that legitimized the group. But then also that opens the possibility for civilians to denounce their neighbors on the basis of false claims, right? Like, for instance, I'm having an affair with my neighbor, and my neighbor doesn't want to move in with me, so I am going to tell the armed group that my neighbor is hitting his wife, or I have a problem with my neighbor, that my neighbor owes me money, so I'm going to tell the group that this person, he or she, is having an affair with another person, because they also punish extramarital affairs, and they punish gossip. The FARC punishes gossip, extramarital affairs, and domestic violence. So it really, this type of regulations can have all sorts of implications for the life that people carry on. And yeah, that was a really interesting thought. Thank you, Valentina. I'm going to unmute Lisa and then Laura.
All right, so I was just going to talk maybe in a more general way about what you were talking about, that sometimes it is to decide whether we live under their control or not, because they can provide to me the services and the goods that I need for survival. Yes, so we were discussing in my group that sometimes we rather live under this rebel governance when we don't have as much as we could have with them. So sometimes they try to give good and services, and maybe people prefer living under their governance than not doing that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So yeah, actually, I want you guys to think on the possibility. Let's say that you live in a building. Probably the majority of you live in apartment buildings, and you have a neighbor that smokes crack, cocaine, bazuco all day. If you had that type of problem, where would you go? Like, it's very annoying to have person right in the window next to you that is smoking crack or bazuco or something that really smells, and that is super annoying. So probably you would go to the, to the administración, to the administradora or administrador, or you would go to the comité de convivencia of your building to report your neighbor, or you would go to the police, right? Because there is a manual of rules that we have to abide to in society. And if there is a neighbor that is using drugs, then you can report that person to the police if it annoys you and if it violates the manual de convivencia of your building. So we have figures of authority. Sometimes they can be very inefficient, but we have where to go. Now imagine that you are a peasant, that you live in a plot of land that is not titled to you because of informal settlement of land, as happens in Colombia. And then you live in a plot of land, and then one day somebody comes and says that a part of that plot of land is his or hers, right? A person that kind of wants to steal from you a part of your land. And then what do? You need, how do you solve that conflict? How do you solve that problem? In the places where there is no rebel groups or paramilitary groups, you have to go to the inspector de policía, to a police officer. The police officer has very little authority and capacity to do something on those types of situations. So what people do is that they have to resort to violence, and it's incredibly common in places where we don't have order, that people just take a machete and they have a machete fight with their neighbors. It's incredibly common. You wouldn't imagine how common it is. I participated with Ana Arjona in this project, in the project of rebel governance that she did. I was her research assistant when I was your age. That was my first job. My first job was working for Ana Arjona. And one of the many works that I did for her throughout the years was to code the interviews that she was doing. And in the interviews to peasants across the country, they were asked how people solved problems with land before the arrival of the armed group, paramilitary or rebel or guerrilla. And the majority of them said that with machete, right? With a machete fight. And the winner of the machete fight would be the one who would be left with the land. So who wants to live in a place like that? Who wants to be subjects of anarchy, right? We humans, we love order, we love rules, we love structure. We love to be able to go to someone with more power and authority when there is something unfair that is happening. So since there is such a huge vacuum of power and authority in the rural areas of Colombia, it has been incredibly easy to all sorts of armed actors to go to those places and impose these rules and regulations, right? So for instance, as I think I was telling you, or maybe it was the other class, I'm not sure, that let's say that in Caquetá, we have the Frente 49, right? Or 48. So people say that if they have a problem, they are going to go to El Juzgado 48, right? To the Court 48. So they are not going to the judges of Colombia. They are going to the commanders of the rebel group, right? Because those are the figures of authority that solve the conflicts. And then this is the reason why I assigned Ana Arjona's article, is that it is key to understand that solving conflicts is such an important aspect of building orders. And rebel groups take the opportunity of the lack of existence, the lack of figures of authority to supply those roles, to supply the resolution of conflicts. Laura, maybe you want to share something
Yes.
We were thinking that also a big difference is that ISIS is obviously religious, so the religion plays an important part on the rules that they make. So if we will have to decide, we will probably decide to go to Cartagena, China, just because, yeah, it's not like the ideal place to live, but we wouldn't be forced to use, for example, a burqa or something like that.
That makes up.
Like something that we cannot even think about that. So yeah, we were just thinking about the big differences that are mostly the religion and also um the financial ways that we think that for example ISIS get money from arms also,
Right.
but not, for example, from drugs, and FARC does from narco traffic and drug distribution. And yeah, that's it.
Right, thank you. Excellent. So, right, yeah. When groups regulate religious through, like, based on a religious faith, it can become much more difficult to live in those orders, especially if you are a woman or you are a member of a faith that is different from the one that the group supports. So, thank you very much for this excellent discussion. So, why do rebels govern? One of the things that we have to keep in mind is that rebel governance is not cheap, right? Rebel governance is, I'm sorry, I'm going to do something here. I'm going to pin my video, okay, so that's great. So, it's not cheap, right? The fact that rebels or from ISIS or from Colombia, they have to spend a lot of money in training people, in putting people, instead of doing war, to regulate civilians. Probably the majority of the forces of ISIS are employed in this Hisba police, right? In the civil police, the police that implements Sharia law. And in Colombia, both rebels and paramilitaries, they had to spend a lot of resources assigning recruits to regulating social life. And they also have to provide services, provide goods. I have been talking about how rebels, they give money to build roads. That's something that I have learned in my own research. That is very, very costly. So this is not cheap to do, to build a social order and to regulate all these things. It costs money. And we have to ask ourselves, why would rebels do this? What are they winning when they do this? So rebels govern to mainly gain cooperation of civilians and accomplish their political objectives. So we have to understand something that we have discussed a lot, is that the role of civilians is key for rebel groups in internal conflicts and civil wars. Civilians are the water in which the fish lives. And what is the fish? The fish is the rebel group. So this logic of insurgency as a fish and the people surrounding the fish is the water, means that without the people, the rebel group cannot survive. The rebel group cannot survive if there is no close links with civilians. And why do people need the cooperation of civilians? They need that cooperation for several things. For gathering information, it is key for the rebel to see, to know, to understand who is giving information to the other side, who is giving information to the army, who is giving information to another rebel group. So information is crucial. And in order to get that information, the only source of information are civilians. They need to win the cooperation of civilians. Okay, another aspect is resources. We have seen it, we have read the ISIS taxation, super complex system. They need resources. In order to get those resources, money to buy weapons, to buy uniforms, to buy food for their people, they need taxation from civilians. And also they need cooperation for recruits.
One of the really interesting things of this research by Ana Arjona is that she demonstrates through very complex methodologies that in the places where the rebels have more control, people join more for a huge variety of reasons, for all the reasons that we studied last class. So in places where we have rebelocracy or high rebel control, there is more recruitment and people join for all reasons. So cooperation is crucial for recruits as well. In order to win that cooperation, then rebels groups, they regulate civilian life, they guarantee public order. Nobody wants to live with a neighbor that smokes crack, so they regulate that. They provide public goods, and that helps them gain that allegiance, that legitimacy from society. Now, Anna talks about different types of rules. I'm not going to talk a lot about it. She talks about disorder, which is, you know, the lack of order, right? Where people, they do not know what to expect from armed groups. There are no clear rules. They don't know what they have to do. And it is really hard to live in a context like that because you never know when you will be the victim of their violence. So people love order. And rebels like also to organize and to impose clear rules of behavior. So disorder happens when there is a lot of competition between groups or when we have a commander that it is very indisciplined, you know, a commander that is a very bad person. And we have had a lot of those commanders in the Colombian conflict that impose disorder in their communities. People do not know what to expect. There is a lot of gratuitous violence. Then when we have order, we have two options. We have rebelocracy, which is, you know, like ISIS, where the armed group rules everything, social, economics, taxation, security. But then we have another possibility, which is called alleocracy or surveillance. She puts different names. Alleocracy, where an armed group is only able to rule taxation and security, like a minimal state. And why would a group do alleocracy and not rebelocracy? According to Ana Arjona, rebels prefer rebelocracy because it allows them to have like more cooperation of civilians, more control, more recruits, more resources. They have more support from civilians. The civilians that live in those areas, they become subjects of the rebel group. But in some places, as was discussed in the reading, the communities have really strong institutions, really legitimate figures of authority. For instance, indigenous groups. Indigenous groups have, you know, the elders of the community that are the ones that embody the authority, and they solve the conflicts, and they are very legitimate. So when the rebel groups encounter a community that has really good institutions, like indigenous groups, like communist societies, places in which there is an important role of the Catholic Church, instead of regulating all aspects of society, they back up and they just control security, movement, and taxation. So it's kind of a calculation of the rebels group. They prefer to have territorial control, but they don't want to have a lot of resistance from the people. And they don't want to kill the elders, for instance, that would make them, you know, really bad. So many times they do, of course, but they prefer when they have a community that can resist, then they back up and they impose an order that it is not as penetrative on society as rebelocracy. So we had this exposition of the three cases in Biotá, which is, you know, next door from Bogotá. We the Librea, the FARC were the ones who ruled here, not the state. So this talks about rebelocracy as this type of social order where the FARC rules everything. Then in Zama, we are the authority here. The FARC didn't rule us. Here we talk about alleocracy, right? Where we have communities with strong and legitimate institutions that allow them to solve their own conflicts, but also to resist the entrance of the armed group. And lastly, social life quickly deteriorated. You couldn't talk to anyone. No one knew who was who anymore. So this talks about disorder. And another aspect that, like discussing this rebel governance, it gives us a glimpse on the fact that civilians and communities, they have agency, right? They are not only victims who are passive and cannot do anything. No, the existence of different types of rebel orders in societies suggests that civilians have a lot of agency. They are capable of going in front of a commander in a rebel group and demand things and say, you know what? You're not going to do that here. We are the ones who will do that. So there is much more agency than what we would expect in civil wars and conflict settings. Then ISIS, we had all this, information, papers, reporting on the different aspects that ISIS regulated, all these documents that show that the group established their own state and they run it according to the strict interpretation of Islam. And what is fascinating about that reporting is that people appreciated the news services because the Iraqi state was bad. It didn't provide sanitation. The streets were dirty. There were problems with electricity. And in weeks after ISIS arrived, those problems were solved. So that made people think, why the state is not able to do this? How is it possible that the rebel group in 2 weeks solved the problem of electricity in this neighborhood? How is it possible? So when people compare the rules, they realize that states can be way more efficient, and that can bring a lot of problems for the state when they win back these territories. I think that you have already discussed this. ISIS rule is so controlling. They enter so many aspects of society that we have to say that they aren't really interested in imposing alleocracies. They are interested in imposing rebelocracies in the places they control. And then lastly, understanding all these rebel governance is incredibly important for winning the war and for successful post-conflict. Why would you think that would be the case? Why do you think that understanding rebel governance it's so important in the context in which the rebel group is defeated and the state comes back? Any hands raised? Sebastian.
Hello.
Hi.
So I'm thinking that there are some wounds and some like areas that the conflict has left on the civilians, and I believe that the state has to know how the rebels have governed them and which tools or supplies the rebels gave to the civilians that the state has to repair in order to be legitimate again and to bring a real reparation to them.
Exactly. So the state has to acknowledge that people have lived and under a different order that probably provides them things that civilians value, and they have to see how they match that provision. Maria Jose? I unmuted you, Maria Jose.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
sorry, I was talking to myself. I was saying that it is really important, especially in positions of post-conflict, where the state has to know where the population or the people that has lived through the conflict stands. So they
Right.
have to know what was the rebel group was offering in order to them to come inside the population and offer the same things, if not more, not only to terminate the conflict, but to assure that the conflict is not going to happen anymore. So I think it is
Exactly.
vital for
Exactly.
the
So if
governments and for the
that's right. So if that rebel group managed to get legitimacy and cooperation from civilians, then the winning part, if it's the state, has to be sure that they earn also the cooperation and the allegiance of civilians. So it is a fight for hearts and minds, right? Like they have to win the hearts and the minds of the population. Lastly, Dario, the last contribution, we listen to you.
Okay. I think that maybe this way we are going to develop a state that covers and can cover the majority of interests that and maybe could represent in a unitary way, and knowing about the failures in the case of not representing the interest of the minorities, or these cases of disagreement with politics that are developing in the state. And I think that knowing about the political objectives and will that have these rivals, it is so important, because maybe this way we can build a state that maybe could be multicultural and could cover the majority of the interests along the territory, and maybe carry out the political and social fights that um, that has been in the history. I don't know.
Okay, yeah, I think that was an interesting idea and discussion. So, okay, folks, this was all for today, and I'm going to upload the recording of the session afterwards. And thank you very much for coming and for your interesting participation today. So, see you. Have a really great Semana Santa. Enjoy, rest at home, and watch movies because you know what else. Study if you can, and see you in about 10 days. Okay, bye.
Bye, thanks.
Bye, teacher. Thank you so much.
Bye, teacher. Thank
Bye.
you.
Very
Have a
rapid
great
question.
week.
But what about the partial? Like the partial is what we have done until now, or
The pageant? No. We will have a final.
okay? Thank you.
The next part, the next assignment is the third lab, which is when we come back. The first
Okay,
the first day
great.
we meet, we have the second lab. The third lab, sorry.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Have a nice weekend.
Thank you, you too.